Hey guys, welcome back to the Surviving Siblings podcast. Today I have, of course, another incredible surviving sibling with me. His name is Jackson Stotler. Jackson, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Maya. It's my pleasure to be here.
I'm really interested in hearing so much of your story because you were quite young when you lost your sister, Lauren. So, Jackson, if you could tell us a little bit, you were 10. So, if you could tell us a little bit about what your relationship was like with Lauren, what your family looked like a little bit, and then, of course, we'll talk about how you lost your dear sister.
Absolutely. So Lauren was my younger sister. I was 4 years older than she was, and she was a joy. She was, for any astrology buffs out there, she was the most Leo to ever Leo, is a great way to describe her. Um,
Yeah.
Full of life, vivacious, gregarious, ostentatious, a little bit bratty. Like she was just so present with everything. And she was fearless in ways that I was not. So even though I was older, even though I was kind of like the trendsetter, I was really a rule follower. I was really nervous about like, oh no, we're going to get into trouble if we do this. Like, we shouldn't do that. And she was just like, no, we're doing this. It's going to be fun. She was a fearless, like, handler of animals. I remember she would always be the one to like reach in and grab the frog and pull it out, and I'd be like, I don't know if I want to touch that. And she would do stuff like that. Um, our family is now and was always very tight knit. So we have great relationships with our parents. We're very fortunate that our parents have got together young and stayed together, and they grew together. I know that we've you talked a lot about in your show with folks how loss and traumatic loss can fracture people so often, and it does in many ways, and it did for us, but we were fortunate to still be together through and through. Lauren and I were the only siblings together at that young age, and then after Lauren passed away, my brother Nathan was born. So I've had a very big journey of siblinghood and having kind of a before and after timeline with my current sibling my current sibling who's embodied. That's I still have a
Right.
very deep relationship with Lauren, even though she's not physically present anymore. So
Right.
yeah, our life was very charmed in a lot of ways. We had a really good family. We moved a lot for my dad's career, and so but at the time when Lauren passed away, we were living in Michigan.
Got it. So many things that you said already that I love. Yes, we talk about this a lot on the show, how this type of loss fractures the family, and we're going to dive a little bit more into that later. But great point,
Hmm.
Jackson. And I think what's interesting too about your story is you were the oldest, right?
Hmm.
And you lost your sister, and then you became an only, and now you're a big brother again.
Hmm.
So, and
Yeah.
it's also a different dynamic because it's a brother versus a sister. So it's just
Yeah.
like so many different dynamics happening. And we've had other folks on the show share that as well. And I think that is a big thing to touch on because it and this happens obviously more when you lose a sibling young, right?
Yeah.
Where you might change the order. I'm the eldest too, so you're the oldest, you're going to be the oldest.
Right.
But it's a different dynamic that probably happened for you
Completely.
having a relationship with Lauren and then having a relationship with your brother that is physically here,
Mhm.
right? I would
Yeah,
imagine.
absolutely. Well, especially since Lauren and I were much more age peers. When we were 4 years apart, which at the time, of course, feels gigantic. But I think about that
Right.
especially now of when Nathan is 14 years my junior. So when Nathan was born, I was almost a second parent to him. I got to be kind of the fun dad, and get to do maybe some less uh, parentally approved things with him
Right.
as he grew up.
I totally get it.
Absolutely.
Yes.
But now he's about to turn 21, and so that's
Right.
he's finally getting to the point of adulthood where we can have a really adult relationship. And if Lauren was still here, we would have already had that for many years. So there's definitely some of that dynamic, and again, I know that y'all have spoken to this before, but how you re-grieve at different points of your life, and as you hit different maturity markers, and you have to re-grapple with the fact that that person that could have been here is not.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And as you go through those milestones with your younger brother, you can't help but think about
Oh, yeah.
your sister too, right? So
Absolutely, yeah.
there's all of that. So
Mhm.
it's a journey, and that's a lot of what we're talking about today on your episode.
Yeah.
And I get it. I have a sister who's 10 years younger than me, and
Yeah.
so my brother was 3 years younger than me. So it's like I have a lot of parallels with you. I get it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Um so like losing him, it's like I lost so many things, but I do have a
Yeah.
sister who's 10 years younger than me.
Mhm.
And yeah, I was cool mom. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
some things maybe I shouldn't have let her do,
Right.
but
Well
I look at it now as, like, at least it was supervised, right? Going to get a tattoo or having a drink, or at
Right.
least it was supervised, right? Versus maybe some of the stuff we did. I don't need to get
Exactly,
into
exactly. Yeah, my basement has always been a very safe zone, and
Right,
for us to talk
right,
about stuff. If he wants to try something, it's like, "Hey, it's okay. You're in a very safe spot, so you're good. I got you." And of
right.
course, too, I'm sure that some of this too is sibling loss, but I feel so like, of course, I'm going to take care of him. He's my guy. I'm going to protect him. So he's not going to be out on his own ever.
Yeah,
So
I totally get it, and I think losing a sibling too makes you, even as the oldest, I think it does make you even more kind of protective, and I think it ups the ante even more, even
absolutely,
more.
absolutely. Well, and this is an interesting thing too about losing Lauren young. Was I was really forced to age very quickly in compared to some
Right.
of my peers, um, and it was just it wasn't for not my parents didn't want to not be present. They wanted to be there and still be good parental figures, but they just couldn't be. They were too deep in their own grief. There was a couple year period where we were just all so lost. And so I had to kind of take a little bit more control over how I was going to get through the day, my life, all of those things. And so it really, it aged me in a way that then I'm glad that my brother hasn't experienced that. Like um, he is joyously radiant at this age that he's at in ways that I wasn't always at the same age, and so it's nice to see him get to have that.
Yeah. Oh, I totally get that, and I know so many of the siblings listening who have lost a sibling young are
Mhm.
gonna get exactly what you're talking about
Yeah.
too, because and I think that's a beautiful place to be, Jackson, because we're able to be happy that they experienced that joy. And, to go deep for a second, sometimes I think, even though it's a horrific thing to lose a sibling and to lose them so young, but sometimes we're given these paths in life and we don't know why, but as we get older, we're like, okay, I get it. Like I could handle it.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe, yeah, I had to grow up super fast, but I get it. I get why it was me carrying this. And that
Yeah.
comes with time. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's the one thing about dis time with trauma and time on your journey is hopefully people can get to this place, but you
Yeah.
get to a place where you experience such pain and you learn that you really can walk through fire without getting burned. Like you really will come out to a spot where you are able to engage with life in a joyful, positive way. You can see the that that kind of loss, that sadness, that grief is just a part of what it means to be a person, and that every one of us will experience that. My mom's great phrase is, "If you're gonna breathe, you're gonna grieve." So
Wow.
we are all gonna experience that, and we can survive it, and we can move forward to live full, joyful, jubilant lives. And it does make some of the things a little bit sweeter. I mean, I look at the fact that, and you talk about those pathways that you can't necessarily see in the moment. I think about those all the time about how one hardship here actually opened up things many, many years down the road that I wouldn't have thought about or known of. Um, and I mean, my brother would not have been born if my sister hadn't passed away. That's just a
Right.
my parents were done having children. They were really like set with a family of four, and then the unthinkable happened, and he would not be here. So and I wish that they could both be here, but I certainly would not trade him for anything. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. It's the gifts in the pain, right? It's the gifts
absolutely.
and the pain that we get, and
Hmm.
it's a real thing. Oh, you just said so many incredible things, Jackson. Like
Oh,
I'm loving our conversation already, but I think that's so remind us what your mom's phrase. So if you breathe, you're going to grieve.
if
Is
you
that what she says?
exactly if you're gonna breathe, you're gonna grieve.
I love it. I
I
love it.
know,
Okay,
yeah.
okay, mom, I'm stealing that
I
one. I'm
know, right?
using that
Yeah.
one.
Shout out Julie Stotler, she got it, she nailed it. Yeah,
Yes, yes, absolutely. So so we're already kind of moving forward. Take
yeah,
us back though, and then we'll
absolutely,
jump forward again
for sure.
to when you lost Lauren. You were
Mhm,
10,
mhm,
Lauren was 6.
mhm.
Tell us what happened this obviously this horrific day to
Absolutely.
sweet 6-year-old Lauren. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
yeah. It was March 21st, 2000. Um, Lauren and I at that age, I was in 5th grade, she was in 1st grade. That was the year where the lower schools and the upper schools started taking different buses. So I would start school earlier and come home earlier, and so we were on just different bus routes, different times. So I was always home when Lauren would come home. This day was a little bit unusual because I had been picked up. I can't remember what medical appointment it was that I had to go to, but we went in, and I was then I survived whatever shot I had to get or whatever, and we had stopped by Dairy Queen on the way home, so I could get a little like pick me up treat. And we actually, when Mom and I were at the line at Dairy Queen, we saw a bus go by, and we were pretty sure it was Lauren's bus. And it was one of those where we were almost like, ah, should we get her? Like, should we have like just go down to the next stop and flag her off and just say like, just come home now and do that? And we didn't because we're just like, we'll just meet her at home. Um, we got home. We managed to beat the bus home. We were there waiting. I was hanging out after school, like playing around, and the school bus that day, normally there had been a family that would come and wait, and our neighborhood, we were like the first driveway in the neighborhood, and the bus would go in, turn around, and then stop in front of our driveway, and then the kids would all cross kind of in a group in front of the bus, and then kind of be at our driveway to be picked up and walked back or driven back through the neighborhood. This particular day, the family of the kids who would normally cross with Lauren had been a little late, so they were sitting back further. So all of the kids except Lauren went alongside of the bus to walk back towards where their parents were all waiting, kind of behind this little turnaround in the neighborhood. So Lauren was the only kid crossing in front of the bus that day. We still, to this day, don't necessarily know 100% what happened. Outside of the fact that this bus driver, who had had, unfortunately, a pretty rough record of unsafe driving, and instead of having that addressed by the school, was just moved from route to route to route when parents would complain. And so it was a pretty it was yeah a really terribly managed situation. So we had this unsafe person who was just, I look at it now, she was a young woman, right? This was a young 20 something woman who had had some terrible things happen in her life. She was kind of begrudgingly doing this job, I think. I don't think she really wanted to do it, be there, any of those things. And she was not paying attention. She was not safe. And she saw most of the kids walk over, and she just gunned it. And she floored it.
Wow.
She had almost left the neighborhood before someone literally ran after her and flagged her down to say, "You can't go. You hit a child." Um, so Lauren was hit so forcefully that she died immediately, which we found out more later when she was taken to the hospital. But I was up in the house with Mom. Suddenly we hear commotion happening down at the bottom of our driveway, and we run outside, and there's Lauren lying there, and there's way too much blood. Like, I know immediately that the way she's lying, my mom and I both were right there. We knew immediately from how she was lying, from the blood that was, and it was that, I'll never forget how vividly bright that was. I know that that's a thing that people like. I never like I've never been a horror movie fan, but the movie blood that they show in those, I'm like, that's not what fresh blood looks like. Like, that's
Right.
it's unfortunately
Yeah.
we know, and it's like that's not.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Um,
Mhm.
and so it was so shocking to take that in. Um, and my mom sent me back into the house. She was like, "Hey, go get Lauren's blanket. Go get her stuffed wolf puppy. She'll want to see that when she wakes up." And even though we're both like, she's not waking up. We know this. We know she's not waking
Right.
up. It was still the moment of like, I have something to do and I'm going to go do it. So all of that then moment becomes that slow blur trauma bubble of like the vivid moments that I remember, the things that are completely lost, the slowness of it, the quickness of it. Lauren was eventually taken to the hospital with my mom riding in the ambulance with her. I had a neighbor had to transport me to the hospital. My dad had was on a business trip. He had just landed in Texas when he got a call then, and this was 2000, so it was before like cell phones. Like someone had to call the hotel that he was staying at or the airline or something, that then he got the message, your child has been in an accident, you need to come home immediately. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
of all of the trauma that we went through, I think about my dad and the journey that he then had to take flying back. I think about parents and that moment of not knowing whether or not his child was alive or dead and flying to get there. I think about that all the time. That's so rough.
Right.
So we ended up at the hospital. She was pronounced dead almost immediately upon arrival. Unfortunately, her body had been so devastated by this accident that the we were absolutely like, yes, whatever organ donation we can take part in, we will. The only things that could be salvaged were her corneas and her heart valves. Everything else was destroyed. And then we opted for an open casket in the days afterwards. The funeral home did their best, but that was always one of those things too that I was, as a young child, I wouldn't want. I wish that I didn't have had to see that. Like it wasn't my sister lying there, and so it wasn't a way for me to be able to say goodbye because she didn't look anything like they couldn't do it. You know, they couldn't make her look that way. So, but the community really came out in force, and we had so much support. Lauren was so gregarious. She was best friends with like everyone in her class, so her whole class turned out. I've always been, even though I'm a Cancer, not a Leo, but I do have lots of friends.
We hope you're enjoying this incredible episode of the Surviving Siblings podcast. I'm your host, Maya Roffler. We'll be back in just a minute after hearing from our incredible sponsor.
GrieveWell is a nonprofit based in Michigan that seeks to build a community that provides healthy grieving and healing so that adults can grieve well and lead a full life after loss. Grief is universal and a natural part of life. Our one-to-one peer support offered to Michigan residents provides healing and a compassionate, supportive, non-judgmental connection for those in grief. Under the support and direction of a licensed social worker, GrieveWell peer counselors are trained to provide compassionate support to adults in grief. We also provide numerous educational webinars and creative healing workshops for those in grief, as well as those who surround them and support them. These are all provided virtually. We're also proud that we're able to offer our services free of charge, as we know the journey to healing can be a long road and there's no one particular path. Please join our community of hope and healing by visiting our website at www.grievewell.com. That's www.grievewell.com. We look forward to connecting with you.
But
I was going to ask you that. I was like, hang on. I didn't want to interrupt, but I was because I'm a Virgo, so I'm
oh,
super into.
excellent,
Yes, so
excellent,
that's why we already get on. Yes, for sure.
perfect.
But I was like, what are you? I was like, I was really getting some water vibes from
Oh
you. So I
yeah,
was like,
oh yeah.
okay. So you're a Cancer,
I'm a
right? So I
Cancer.
mean,
Yep.
I mean, we're gonna hear this through your whole episode. Of course, is just the heartfelt,
Yeah.
the heart, because
Mm-hmm.
Cancers are so heartfelt. I mean,
We
sometimes they're
are.
called emotional, but I think your strength is your heart for sure. And
Thank
so,
you.
and you
Yes.
can hear that already in your conversation, and that's why your sister, the Leo, was the spicy one,
Oh
and
yeah,
you're more
absolutely.
the heart.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm a Sagittarius moon, so I'm very like I'm so emotional, and then also I'm just
Yeah.
like really logical, planned, oriented, all of those things. So it's a nice balance. And I do have Sagittarius rising, so I can get a little spicy with stuff. But I
That
think
is why you have the connection with her. Okay, this is an
exactly.
astrology moment in
Right?
here.
There you go.
Yeah, to the fire, and then you had a Leo sister. That makes total sense. Oh my
Exactly,
gosh.
exactly. It was a great balance. It
Wow.
was a great match. I think now about like I wonder what we'd be getting on like as adults. I'm sure we'd go on a lot of interesting adventures, and then I'd also be like,
Yeah.
your life is too much. I need a break. Like, but
Yeah.
yeah. So we really had an outpouring of support from the community. That was amazing. That was wonderful. There was then some rifts in the community later when it started to come out about how much the school had mismanaged like the driving situation.
With the bus driver,
Yeah, and
right.
so there was a lawsuit against the school of like, "Hey, you guys really screwed this up." And so
Yeah.
and that was, the way that the school chose to proceed with that lawsuit, they, essentially claimed negligence, and so because they claimed negligence, we couldn't, like, bring anything to show, like, the depths of negligence was what I learned about court proceedings, and this is happening when I'm, 10 to 14. So I was
Right.
severely out of the legal loop at this this age and shielded from
Right.
most of it. But essentially because the facts of all of that we knew weren't coming to light and we were bound to not necessarily bring them to light. Um, pardon me. A lot of the community members then just saw like, oh, these these people are greedy and are suing the school and like they're taking money from all of our tax dollars and all of our our things like that. So that caused some. And the woman who had been driving the bus, um she was a had been from that community for her whole life and had had some trouble. So there was some, and we had moved there semi recently, and so there was a lot of some of those tensions of like outsiders kind of coming in and busting our school apart, versus the this poor woman who had a tough experience. So there was definitely some of that, and it was a tension of then when we did leave that we no longer live there. It was a tough moment of like, okay, well, my sister's buried here, but we've had kind of a mixed feeling in this community. So what does it mean for us? How do we move from that? That was definitely a journey we went on as well.
Yeah. And at 10 to 14, what an impressionable time for you to be exposed to all this this
Absolutely.
stuff, right? All these basic politics going on in your community, and then also this just so much to unpack there. But what, like, was this bus driver prosecuted? What happened as far as that? Cuz
Yes.
there's so
Yeah.
much happening with this.
There
Yeah.
was, yeah, there was both a criminal suit against her for negligence. I believe, she was found guilty of um, like a misdemeanor it wasn't vehicular manslaughter, which is what she was originally I think charged with, and then it was bargained down to a lesser charge. I don't believe she maybe served like a very minimal jail sentence, like maybe 30 some days in prison, but I don't even know if it was that. I think it was primarily community service that she was sentenced with, and then she had her license revoked. So that was the extent to which she was punished. My parents felt very intensely about that for a long time, about having seen somebody who didn't seem to take ownership of her actions, has caused something so traumatic, having all that. I think it's because I was so young, I have a different feeling about it than they have, and I've always had a different kind of relationship with forgiveness in the moment, and the bus driver in the community. And part I think that is absolutely because I didn't have to live in it the same way that they did. They shielded me
Right.
from so much of that. And so I- I'm um, I'm at the point of my life now, especially, that I'm like, well, shoo, I've seen so many people who have lost somebody who then they've gone after that person and have wanted them to receive the death penalty, to be like put in prison for life, to be punished to the maximum extent of the law, and that has not brought healing or closure for them. For
Oh,
yeah,
Jackson, so well said. Yes,
yeah,
this is exactly what I wanted to ask you about.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
A lot of folks, so there's, and we're going to talk about GrieveWell in a minute, so I know
Mhm,
you guys have experience with this too. We do support groups, we do, we offer events and different
mhm.
things. And time again, and if you're a sibling listening to this, you know what we're talking about, or you might be on this journey. me losing my brother to homicide.
Mhm.
I thought that was going to bring me peace, right? I thought that was going to bring
Yeah.
him justice and this. But you are so dead on, Jackson, because the reality is we spend all this time thinking that, and then whatever we end up getting, right, whether it's like this bus driver got jail time,
Mhm.
wasn't that much, but something happened, right?
Mhm.
I always tell people that are going through something like what you went through or what I went through, where there is someone at fault, it's not going to bring your sibling back. It's
Right.
not going to change anything.
It's
So
not.
so you shift from going through this horrific, significant, perhaps the most significant loss you'll go through in your entire life, thinking, okay, I'm going to work on that, but I'm really going to go after this next, right? This next thing. And you think that's going to give you this relief. And you're right. There's a big buildup. And then you're like, wait a second, they're still not here, right? All
Yeah.
that, it almost prolongs your grieving.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, I think you just hit the nail on the head with that, really.
Absolutely. Well, it keeps you in a state of when someone's so at fault and you can point to it and say that was wrong and you deserve to like experience consequences of that wrongness, that puts us in a state of righteousness, right? Like we're right about the fact that that person was did this wrong and did this harm. What our current justice models lack entirely is any sort of reparative justice. We have a punitive justice system, which is definitely like, you know, an eye for an eye. It's you caused you committed harm, you're going to receive harm now because that's what you deserve. We don't
Right.
have a sense of what it means to be restored by a process of
Yeah.
healing together in that kind of sense. Because obviously the people who are at fault for these things, if they have any sense of empathy, they're harmed too, and that took me a very long time to ever get to really see the person who caused Lauren's death as a whole person. But
Right.
when you start to give them the complexity and nuance too, it's like, wow, yeah, they're also dealing with the fact that they killed someone or caused someone harm. And of course, not everyone is has the
Right.
same.
Disclaimer, not everyone
Yes,
is that
not
person,
everyone
and
is
some
that
people
person.
should be off the street,
Yes,
right?
exactly,
Exactly.
exactly. Yeah. Well, and
I agree with you.
it's that safety thing, right? Of like, can this
Mhm.
person even be part of the community anymore? Possibly
Yeah.
not. And that's the grappling of how we even deal with that. But what it definitely doesn't
Yeah.
do is, one, it never brings your sibling back, and two, if you pour all of your time into that outcome and you think that that's going to provide some kind of magical relief or closure, that is just it's just a part of the story. It's not the end of it. And
Yeah.
one of my favorite lines from one of my favorite songs is by Brandy Carlisle, and the line is, um, "Nobody gets out alive, and nothing holy comes from being right."
Wow.
It's like, ooh,
Yeah.
unfortunately, yeah, that is
Yeah.
so true.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so for me, it was part of the. It was easier for me when I reached adulthood and when I really started to grapple with forgiveness and all of these things. It was much easier for me, who hadn't lived through having to carry the adult responsibility of getting through that process, to be able to say she was a young woman who was so hurt in so many ways. She was clearly in a ton of pain. And yes, she should not drive a vehicle anymore, but she needs to live her life, and her being in prison would not change substantially what needs to happen going forward, and certainly wouldn't bring the kind of healing that any of us needed.
So, Jackson, you were telling us a little bit about how your parents, of course, had this adult experience, right? And losing their youngest child, you losing their only daughter. But for you, you're 10. And even though it was an experience that pushed you to grow up quite quickly,
Mhm.
you feel like in some ways that it sheltered you. Your parents did a really good job of that and helping you on your grief journey. I'd love to hear more about that. Like, what was this like for you? And, what are the positives? And then also, like, how are you still, like, take us through your grieving? Because this is 24 years. So I'd love to hear more
Mhm.
about that. But also, how has the journey been? Because I'm sure it's evolved and changed as you became a teenager, as you became, you know, went off to school or started
Mhm.
working and, like, in your 20s and now in your 30s, like, I'm sure it's been an evolution for you.
Absolutely, and that's exactly it. Evolution is the right word to call that, and, 'cause it everyone knows this, and of course, there's some people who, when you're fresh in grief, you don't necessarily wanna hear that you'll always be grieving a little bit, but you will. It just it changes and it shifts and it goes from, much like that active wound to something that is an old injury. It will still be there. You'll still feel it. You'll still know about it. Some days it's gonna hurt more than others, but you learn how to be whole with it. Um, so yeah, the early years were definitely blurry in a lot of ways, and it was that time of it's an awkward time of life anyway, that early tween to early teen years. As a very rule following kid and very like much like order and strict, and I had just a really internal sense of morality of like what I should do to be a good person or be good, really follow the rules. I've come to expand that a little bit in my older years about
Yeah.
following, etc. But that kind of helped me, I think, a little bit have some grounding basis because I did really need to step up and care for myself in ways that um, other people who have absent parents grow up in different at different rates and have to take on more responsibilities and do different things. And parents are absent for a whole variety of reasons that are oftentimes not solely their responsibility or fault. And so that was definitely the case here. Was my parents were grieving. My parents were totally lost in their own journeys in their own ways and finding their ways out. Um, Fortunately, we still held on very tightly to each other as a family, and we were physically present with each other even when we couldn't be emotionally present with each other. Um, so those years were tough and kind of a blur. You get into the high school period there. I'm starting to become more of an independent person, and also then I have my baby brother who's now come onto the scene just as I'm starting my freshman year of high school. So that was a very cool experience and a new experience of that age of my life was really figuring out kind of those early you're starting to get some more distance from the loss of that 5 to 10 year period of grief.
Oh,
uh
yeah.
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 Yeah, because you're writing about in that chunk there
Yep.
now, right, Maya? Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
You start to do a lot of heavy processing there. You start to see things oftentimes with more nuance, starting to have more of a perspective of what kind of had happened, especially for me becoming an adult was really like, oh, it contextualized a lot of things for me. Um, and then also having the joy of having a little brother and having when my little brother was when my parents told me that they were having another child. Well, they told me they were having another child, and originally I was like, "Great, I'm ready for you to adopt a baby girl." And they were like, "That's not what's happening." So
You gotta love, like, a kid's perspective on this, right? It's like, "Great, that's awesome,
I was like fully ready. I was like, "Excellent. I know exactly what it's going to happen." And they were like, "That's not anything." I was just devastated when they said, "You're going to have a little brother." Cuz then I was like, "I don't know how to be a big sibling to a little brother. I know how to be a big sibling to a little sister. I wanted to do that again." Like I also now I'm going to have to lose at video games. This is the worst. And it turned out to be fantastic, and I love losing at video games. But that was definitely a growth moment as becoming then a young adult. I really, I naively thought at the age of 18 that I'm like, wow, I'm really well adjusted to this. I've got a really good handle on this. Lauren's with me in spirit, is how I feel about her. We have this relationship. It's great. And then I went off to college, and going to college I dealt with grief in a whole new way all over again, and I was not expecting that. And I've come to see that with big life changes at all stages, I grieve in different ways.
Oh,
And
so
so,
true, Jackson. Yes, yes.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So I was grieving then for, not for this independence, for how things were changing, for being a young adult, for having things that I wanted to talk to an age period, I know I wanted to talk to someone about how much I missed my parents and also how nuts they were driving me at different points. I wanted
Right.
to have that kind of relationship. Instead, Nathan's coming and sitting on the floor in a beanbag with me, and he's like sitting in my lap playing Mario Kart. It was a very different experience of, a sibling visiting you at college. When I then moved abroad for a year, and that was I had thought, oh great, I've really handled now like this grieving of being an adult and like being in college, and then I lived abroad and I was re-grieving all over again for this new period of life. So that was really the point when I realized too that that grief moment in my journey was about 10 years out then from when Lauren had died, and I was really struggling. And I started to see a therapist in the UK where I was living for the year. And that's when it clicked to me like, oh, I'm going to grieve every single big change. There's going to be a new experience with it. And that's going to happen for forever. Okay, I can do that. I will figure that this is something that I can walk and figure out how to do. And that gave me the gentleness to approach that. And at this point, 24 years later, multiple big life changes, um, and my big upcoming life changes, I'm about to get married. And so I'm really excited about that.
Yeah.
And we're thinking about, okay, how do we include Lauren in the wedding?
Yes.
And I only have just reminded myself of like, oh yeah, I'm probably going to be really emotional on my wedding day at different for different reasons. And and now it's like, all right, it reminds me to hold myself gently during those times and to give myself the grace of feeling all the feelings. Um, is that's the thing that I've learned about grief and life and joy and being human is it's not about not feeling the hard feelings. It's about feeling all of the feelings and
Yeah.
holding yourself with gentleness and kindness and holding others with that grace too, to know that that's just part of the human experience, and to, as much as we can, relish all of it
Yeah.
and continue to carry it forward.
I think that's so beautiful, Jackson, and I agree. I love how you say, like, hold yourself gently, because I think
Yeah.
we're like, grievers are really hard on themselves, and it's
Oh,
because
absolutely.
right? I mean, it's because we've been told, like, you have to okay, it's been a couple days, like, get over it, go back to work, and it's just like,
Right.
it's, like, awful, it's awful.
Right.
But you
Yeah.
bring up a something that we talk about a lot too. Congratulations. When is your wedding? We have to ask.
It is 11/11, so
I love it.
yeah, I know, we 111124. So we were like, "That's
Yeah.
really good numerology. That seems fun. We're gonna
You are right up my alley. I'm all
blessed."
about numerology too. Yes, that's a great day to get married.
Exactly, good
Um,
numbers.
exactly. But I love that you mentioned this because I hear this all the time from siblings. Like, hey, I'm about to get married. My, my fiance, my partner never met my sibling, right?
Yeah.
Or met them or didn't, all these things. And I relate to that too because when I got married, my husband, I met him 2 years after my brother was killed. And so
Mhm.
it was like, how do I
Yeah,
incorporate this? There's all those
yeah.
things. And you're right. It's another milestone and you're going to feel all the feels. And I did. And I pushed a lot of it down. And I tell people all the time, I wish I hadn't have done that. And
Oh, that's good.
I didn't celebrate it as much as I should have, like the wedding and the
Mhm.
whole experience, because I didn't feel like I could. But it's quite the
Yeah.
opposite, and I think that's beautiful that you're already thinking about how you're gonna incorporate Lauren, because I think that's the
Mhm.
healthier way to deal with
Mhm.
it, and it can be something I've had folks come to me, you guys, siblings, and say, I carried a couple of her favorite flowers in my bouquet." I'm like, "That's awesome," right?
I
Or
love
like,
that.
yeah, or my groom, or or I, if it's a guy, I wore the color of my brother that he loved in a pockets, but
Mhm.
like little things. It doesn't have
Oh,
to be
yeah.
magnanimous, right? And like huge. It's
Yeah.
I just think it's important that there's representation, and that's, I try to share my regrets with folks. I'm like, okay, this is what I wish I would have done better, and I think it would have been healthier. So I love that you
Absolutely.
shared that too. Yeah.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, oh, those are such wonderful ideas. I was just talking to my fiance this morning about "Hey,
Yeah.
what are we thinking? What are we getting?" She's a big advocate of, "Hey, carry a picture of her in your pocket so that we
Ah,
can pull that out and have it right there for pictures with us." Like, that's a really
yeah,
great, I love that idea. Love the
yeah.
idea of the colors. That's a good
Isn't that
integration.
cool? Yeah.
Yeah, Lauren was
Wish
such
I
a
made that up, but,
no,
it didn't come from me, it was other people. But, and that's
that's great.
another thing too, and I'm glad we're talking about this because I get asked the question a lot, but it's so personal. Like, I can't
Mhm.
tell you what's gonna make sense to you. Like, I
Yeah.
love what your fiancé is saying, carry the picture in that because that makes sense for you, right? Carry a
Mhm.
picture of
Right.
Lauren. But I think for everyone, it's so personal, and that's the
Absolutely.
same thing with, like, anniversaries and how to honor
Mhm.
them. I always
Totally.
kinda push the question back, Jackson, and I go, "Well, what was important to your relationship? What
Yeah,
makes you think about
absolutely.
each other?" Like, for you with Lauren, she loved animals, she was spunky, she was feisty, like, there's so many things I'm sure that you connect with,
Mhm.
and that's special, and so, like, that's not really for me to tell
Yeah.
what you can do, but we can give you ideas all day
Right,
long, but
absolutely. Well,
it's so
and
personal.
then you have that kind of cadre of ideas, and being able to funnel that into, and let that energy kind of flow about what really would embody that presence here. If she could be here, what would it do? And I think, I mean, the whole setup of our wedding is very much like what Lauren would have just absolutely had a kick off. We're getting married in Vegas. We're getting married
I
by
love it.
Elvis, who's going to be in drag. It's going to be awesome. Like, it's going to be a blast. But that actually, a quick side story about that kind of, going with kind of the allowing the person to speak through, and really finding an idea that speaks to them, and finding that way to do an honor and memorial.
Yeah,
I'd always wanted to get a memorial tattoo for Lauren,
yeah,
and I had several years ago, I had gone out and I was getting a tattoo with my then partner at the time, and her best friend were visiting, and we had all decided we were going to go get this one, like, the planets in a line, and I was like, oh, cool, this is really cool. And so we're going, we're headed out to the tattoo shop that day, and I had been really into Ghost, the kind of metal band at the time, and I listened to them on my way in. And I was like, "This is great." And I got to the tattoo parlor, and they're it's starting I'm starting to get, like, really good vibes. Like, it's like, "Oh, I feel like Lauren might be here right now. This is feeling good." And, it was this very much like there was my partner at the time, and her best friend were very had a very sibling-like relationship, and I'm kind of observing that, and I'm feeling really good about it. And, we're, like, shutting down the tattoo parlor because we had booked late appointments, and they're like, "Hey, what do you wanna listen to?" And the tattoo artist said, "Hey, put on Ghost." Like, we love and I was like, "Oh, awesome." So Ghost is playing, and, I'm the last person to go, and I'm getting this tattoo done, and I'm talking to the artist, and I was saying, I've always thought about doing a memorial tattoo, but I'm really not sure what to get. Her name doesn't feel like it resonates well with me for that. I don't really necessarily want to do, like, the spot of her grave because she's not in the ground. It feels like, those things don't
yeah,
really sit with me. And he said, well, I always encourage people to get the tattoo that they think the person would have gotten.
I love it.
And I was like, oh my God, I'm getting that right now.
Yeah.
Lauren would have loved this tattoo. Maya, it turns out that I didn't know this at the time. I got that tattoo on National Siblings Day.
I have chills, that's
I know.
crazy.
Isn't that amazing? So now
Yeah.
I know too, like, National Siblings Day is one of those days where I'm like, I'm paying attention, sis. What do you want to say? What do you want to show me? So yeah, it's so in the sense of having something with me and having, like, her colors and things, she's right here on my arm all the time.
I love it. I love
Yeah.
can we see it? For those of you watching on
Oh,
video,
yeah,
you can
for those,
probably show
so
it. Yeah.
it is this set of the planets right here, and then I had the color work added at a later time. But yeah, I love my little rainbow planet splash is one of my Lauren tattoos.
I love it. Yes, if you guys
Yeah.
are watching on video, you can see that. That is so cool. I have a memorial tattoo for my brother as well. Had never gotten a tattoo in my life. It was the
Mhm.
first one, and it was just an interesting thing, and I actually added to it later, and
Awesome.
it was weird because I had to reschedule to because I was
Mhm.
adding 2 flowers. I was at my brother was a sunflower, I'm a rose, like, those were our, like,
Awesome.
things.
Awesome.
And so I wanted to add that on to just, like, some of the script stuff I had gotten, right? I was like,
Mhm.
I don't really love this. I wanna make this a little more
Make it
aesthetically
pop.
beautiful."
Mhm.
And I'm laying there with my tattoo artist, and I'm, like, looking at the date, and it was May 5th, so it was 5/5, and it was the
Mhm.
5th year since my brother had been gone, and I was like,
Wow. Look at
So
that.
there's just, like, these
Yeah.
numerology signs, there's these
Oh,
signs, like, you
yeah.
heard the song, like, I mean, it was really there were a lot of other things that happened that day, which I've shared on the show before, so I'm not gonna bore everyone, but just I connect with you
Love
so
it.
much because there are
Oh, yeah.
signs there with us,
Yeah.
and I'll never forget just looking up at the calendar, like, 5, 5, 5, oh my
Yeah.
god, I'm like, "This is so
Oh, yeah.
weird."
That's
Yeah,
so
yeah,
totally yeah, that in our family, we call those flybys,
I
although
love it.
sometimes, they're so not subtle, we call them stompovers, 'cause it's it's not
Love
even a
that.
gentle reminder, it's like a, "Hey, I'm here right now telling you this, pay attention." Yeah,
Look
it's
at me, I'm
wonderful.
here.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and, for Lauren being her Leo self, it would make sense that it's very, very big and obvious and unmistakably like, "Hey, sis, see you."
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. It's in your face. Yeah.
it is. She was never not.
So, I what I think is also really just so much beautiful knowledge and just heart that you've shared so much in this episode already, Jackson. But
Thank
what
you.
I'm curious to kind of switch gears just a little bit, and
Mhm.
what I find fascinating is you talked about how your family, and again, something we talk about on the show all the time, is this type of loss really can rip you apart or really bring you
Mhm.
together. And
Yeah.
although your family went through so much, like, your parents are still together to this day,
Mhm.
right? They were
They
able
are.
to make it through, and they had your brother, and they've we don't really move on from this, but we move forward, as you so beautifully said earlier in the
Yeah.
episode too. Um, I'm curious because I know your mom, and we're talking about it on this episode, created GrieveWell. So I'd
Mhm.
love to know a little bit about the relationship with your parents and like how this evolved and how she
Yeah.
does. I know she's kind of this, I know you're all involved in it, but she's really the spearhead of this. How did this all
Absolutely.
evolve? I'm so
Yeah,
curious.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was one of those. I know so many folks when they experience this losses and the grief, you want to do something with it. You don't want it to be, in vain. You don't want it to have just sit with you and not. It's so we feel called to do something. I mean, look at this amazing podcast that you've got now. This is you were called and you answered that call.
totally.
My mom's call was to try and find and offer some new models of community grief support that had existed in some places but weren't as widely known about. So oftentimes the community models are, you can see a one-on-one therapist, which is great. And as I started seeing a therapist basically after Lauren died, and I've had therapists throughout my life, and I still regularly see my therapist as like a nice. It is good to have a check in for someone who helps you with your life. It's wonderful.
I
Big
agree.
fan.
I agree. Same
Yeah.
same thing here. I've been in therapy for a really long time too, since I was a child because of my dysfunctional family, and then when
Mhm.
this happened, forget it. But I'm like you, I don't go all the time, but it's like I
Yeah.
call it like a like you said, check-in. I love that. I
Yeah.
call it my little tune-up. Sometimes I just need a little tune-up. I need a little
Exactly.
help. Little
Exactly.
check-in. Yeah,
It's really therapists are kind of the people who like can walk in and kind of be like, "Oh, this is what I'm seeing," and you're like, "Oh yeah, it's right there," and I wasn't paying. Okay, thank you. So, but it's a great model, but it's not always for everybody, and
agree.
it certainly doesn't always get people to feeling like they're seen in the same way as being in community with other grievers does. But the community support model of just going to a grief group where you have, I mean, especially when I was a young person grieving, I was going to a grief group where people had lost their grandparents, and I was just like, I'm sorry, that is, your loss is meaningful and that has clearly had an impact on your life. I watched my sister get crushed in front of my house. I'm in a different spot than you, and I'm experiencing different kind of grief, and you're not speaking to it, and so it can feel very isolating even within those grief groups, within that groups of for that support context of grief, or people who had lost parents. I didn't know what that was like in the same way. I had my parents absent, but they weren't gone. So it wasn't the same. Um, and so GrieveWell is founded on a model of peer-to-peer grief support. So what they do is for people who are more fresh in their grief, they pair you with someone who is further along in their grief journey. So it's almost and they try to match similar type of loss to similar type of loss. So you have somebody who's this peer who's literally been where you've been, who has walked that path, and someone who just in those early stages you can look to and say they're still okay. They're making it.
Yep.
And then the GrieveWell model is about ministry of presence. It's about being with somebody, and that's what you have to do. It is about showing up as a peer support counselor and just being there. And there's a wonderful motto for young chaplains who are in hospitals for the first time, where it's oftentimes we say, don't just stand there, do something, and this motto is don't just do something, stand there. And so it is very much about that idea of be present, be with that person. You might talk, you might just go for a walk, you might sit and enjoy a coffee at Starbucks, you might talk about every other part of your life and not the loss. You might just sit and cry. But that's the way to do it, and people have those part, and then eventually if you go through the program with your grief peer support counselor. Eventually, you can potentially graduate and then become a peer support counselor yourself if you so desire to do so. And
That's
so then
cool.
you kind of pass that torch of being able to be kind of that healing presence in someone's life. Because as we know too, there's the people who you get so much support potentially initially, like there's a really groundswell of people who are there, and then it drops off a lot, and you might get a couple people coming back, but people feel awkward then about not wanting to remind you of grief and things like that when you're still living in it every day. And so to have somebody who's really present there and says like, "Hey, I'm here and I remember why I'm here," is
Yeah.
a big deal. To have someone who just reaches out to you on anniversaries and says, "Hey, I'm thinking about you today," and I'm thinking about your loved one today. It's huge, and it makes an enormous difference. And so that's the GrieveWell system. Right now, they're based solely in kind of Michigan is their footprint. Really, southeastern Michigan is where they are based and can help people with this kind of um, individual support. But they've also now branched into trainings for corporations and for workplaces to talk about like how do you support someone coming back to the workforce after having experienced loss. They're starting a program at Arizona State University to bring peer counseling and peer support to college age students who are often, talk about a group that has a bunch of different vulnerabilities and has
Yes.
experienced a lot of things. As I talked about earlier, it's providing that level of that support to those groups. So it's growing, it's spreading, and they have a bunch of online events that happen throughout the year as well that anyone can take part in. I did a grief poetry workshop,
Oh, I
like
love that.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it was all done by Zoom, and so we could just zoom in and write poems and then share them, and it was really beautiful, and hearing the other people share their poems too was just a really gorgeous moment. So it's I highly encourage everybody to check it out. It's and really it, I hope that that kind of model too can spread more because it really does fill a gap that we don't have in our current community support networks.
Oh my gosh, I could not agree with you more, and I love that your family, but I know your mom is really, like, the one pressing for so thanks, mom, we
She is,
appreciate you, and
yes.
I agree, I mean, so much of what you shared is and again, guys, you can visit grievewell.com, all the information will be linked in the show notes as well, their social media, their website, you can find the full offerings for all the webinars, I know you guys do free webinars, you have the
Hmm.
one-on-one peer support, there's so
Yeah,
many things. There's so much more. We could do a whole episode just talking about the things you guys offer.
absolutely.
But I think it's so beautiful because you're right. We're really lacking that. Therapy is fabulous. I would not be able to sit here without my therapist, and I'm sure you feel the same way, right?
Absolutely.
But there is something about connecting. It's why you guys listen to this show. It's why you're on this show, Jackson,
Hmm.
right? It's something about this experience that only we understand, and I would never wish it on anyone, but
Yeah.
we do understand it. So, and it's like any other kind of loss, right? Speaking to someone who's been through a similar loss to you, there's just a deeper knowledge, a deeper understanding, and there is those beautiful things like folks that will reach out on the death anniversary or the birthday of your
Hmm.
sibling, and like
Yeah.
there's it's there's almost no words for how beautiful that relationship is. So I think it's really wonder. And how long ago did your mother found this organization,
Oh,
Jackson?
that's
It's
a
been around for
that's
a
a
while.
It's a great quiz question and one that I don't. I don't feel like I have the concrete founding date in my head because it felt like it was so part of what my mom wanted to like start just a couple years after Lauren. She started to look into this because it was really too. My mom was the spearhead, but my dad was almost the one who inspired it because my dad is not a group therapy guy, and he's
Yeah,
not really an individual therapist person. Like he went a couple times, but it really wasn't for him. What really helped him was was finding somebody who was also a father who had lost a child and being able to pair with them and talk with them about that and talk about how you continue being a father after this death. And so then my mom was like, "This needs to exist every, this we got to get this going. This needs to
I
exist some
love
more
it.
places." And then my dad had both of them have been then peer counselors for other folks who are now peer counselors for other folks. So it's a great,
Yeah.
it's really great. But yeah, I want to say, we've it's been at least a decade, if not more.
Yeah.
Probably longer than that. I'm trying to think of when we've also moved so many times at various junctures. It's like, when did we move back to here and do this thing? I want to say it was in the late 2000s, early teens that GrieveWell was founded, um, and then has been just continuing to um, go along with their mission and help as many people as they can with the
Yeah.
resources that they've got.
Yeah. I love it. I think it's a great organization. I love what you guys are doing. And, one thing that we talk about a lot when we have, because I'm sure you've listened to the show, not a lot of guys come on the show. Not a lot of
Yeah,
guys come on the show. It's very
yeah,
interesting. We receive hundreds of applications, and, like, I
mhm,
can count on one hand how many are men. So you
yeah,
touched on a really good point before we close out. I just wanted to kinda call this out, how your father was grieving very differently than your
mhm,
mother, and the
yeah,
peer-to-peer was better for him, and so I think
yeah,
it's interesting. There is something about being a guy and how you grieve, and more adult males is what we find, doing
mhm,
this show and doing the support. But I I love that you shared that about your dad, because I think
yeah,
that is I do think when men kind of connect and they have that experience, I think it's helpful for everyone, but
absolutely.
especially with men in the way they grieve. I think it's interesting that you brought that up. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've yet seen some societal turnover in men being allowed to understand the depths of their emotions and feel. And I think part of that also is how we allow men to express and feel love, and especially for men like of my dad's generation in particular, who were taught to be very stoic, to be very to not necessarily be very emotional. And my dad's not a very emotional guy. I joke that my mom has the emotions of two people and my dad has the emotions of like a tablespoon, so it's just they're a little bit different scales.
I think a
um
lot of people will relate to that. Yes, and that's why I
yeah,
like to talk about this and ask this question. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And so he needed something that was going to allow him to tap into his emotions without feeling so outside of his vulnerable comfort zone that he couldn't grapple with it. But it's also that we expect men to be devoted and devoted husbands, devoted fathers, uh, devoted friends, but we don't give them the room to talk about their love in a way that gives it its full range, unless like you're a poet or something, or a country music star. You're allowed to then gush about love, but there's still like these right, there's still
So
like
true.
these masculine confines around, like, don't show it somehow. And so then to grieve and to feel grief as this extension of love, as this outpouring and this loss of how to connect with someone in love, is so difficult when we don't allow men to talk about their emotions, to feel fully, and to be seen fully as emotional people. And so
Yeah.
and I mean, there's whole disciplines on that about in psychology and all sorts of
Absolutely.
things. But at least for this, in the context of this moment, I hope that more men allow themselves feel the depths of their grief,
Yeah.
to know that they don't have to just push past it, that they deserve gentleness and kindness and to be seen for their full selves too. And if they're not feeling like they can get that in a group, if they're not feeling like a one-on-one therapy relationship is getting them there, hopefully some walking together with someone who's been down that path will at least allow them to feel seen in ways that they might not otherwise. So if there are men listening out there to this, and are grieving, I hope that they are able to find the place where they feel that they can be fully themselves in their full emotional depth of their grief, of their love, of their loss.
Yeah, I love that, Jackson. That's why I like to ask this question with every guy that comes on the show because there's a different perspective, but also a very common theme woven in. And I think this is a great and beautiful resource. So I
Yeah.
just want to thank you so much for sharing your story, sharing Lauren with us and your family and GrieveWell. Tell us where we can connect. Obviously, grievewell.com, guys.
Yes.
All of the socials are in the notes as well. But Jackson, if someone wanted to connect with you, is there a particular way you prefer to be contacted?
Sure, I do have a private Instagram, but I'm happy to if anybody adds me because they've seen this. I'm happy to add you back and chat and DM me about that. I am J_Stots STOTS on Instagram. I think I have a Facebook that I never ever check anymore. So Instagram is the way.
Got it.
And yeah, that's the best way to see as one podcast that I listen to talks about social media that I may or may not use.
Yes,
Is I'm on there. Yeah,
absolutely, absolutely. And again, you guys can visit grievewell.com
yes,
to find more information. Check out our show notes. Jackson, thank you again for being here. It has been a pleasure.
absolutely. Thanks so much, Maya. This has been an amazing discussion. Thanks so much for everything you're doing with this podcast for the community of surviving siblings, and I am looking forward to continuing to be engaged with all of the endeavors and all of the people in this community going forward.
We would love that, Jackson. Thank you so much. And thank you guys so much for listening to the Surviving Siblings podcast.